So that's the large idea behind this side event, and I'll pass it on to Matt to take over.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Indian, for that introduction. My name is Matt Pollard. I'm from the International Commission of Jurists, and it's a real privilege for me to have been asked to moderate this discussion. I think it's not only an exchange between our panelists, but also an exchange with all of you, and a very interesting idea of drawing out some of the similarities and perhaps solidarities or ways of learning from the two situations on Burma, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. From the point of view of the International Commission of Jurists, we work in quite focused areas on independence of judges and lawyers in both countries, on access to justice for victims of human rights violations in both countries, and in the case of Burma on business and human rights. But the discussion today is much broader. We're going to really be canvassing a wide range of issues, drawing out commonalities to both situations. So as I say, it's a real honor to be here with these two very significant human rights defenders. To my left, Namalka Fernando from Sri Lanka is well known to those who have spent much time here at the Human Rights Council. She's a prominent human rights defender, a lawyer, and activist with over 30 years of peacemaking experience. She is a co-chair of South Asians for Human Rights and the president of the International Movement Against All Forms of Discrimination and Racism, which together with the Forum Asia is the co-convener of this event. And that's an organization devoted to eliminating discrimination and racism, forging international solidarity amongst discriminated minorities, and advancing the international human rights system. To my right is Kin Omar, a Burmese democracy activist who is noted for her leadership in the 8888 uprising and her work with the Women's League of Burma and the Burma Partnership. She also has a long experience as a human rights defender, having started down that road when she was 20 years old studying chemistry at university, signed an open letter protesting a certain move by the government, which led to her being arrested and held, and then launched really on a pathway then of many years of activism. Both have spent some time, due to the circumstances in their country, living outside of their country, and thus are sort of a bridge between the national situation and the international perspectives as well. So I think we're set for a very interesting discussion today. Just to let you know about the format then, the idea is and I thank very much the co-conveners for providing me with a series of questions to go through on different themes. And we'll start in each case by having some sharing from our two panelists, and then I'll invite comments and questions from the floor. I think in order to make sure we make it through all the different topics we want to cover, as we're going through, we'll maybe just take one or two questions per topic from the floor, and hopefully then we'll have some time at the end for, again, an even more open discussion. So with that then, I'll turn to the first question for our panelists, which is on attacks on minorities. Obviously, the situation of ethnic and religious minorities in terms of human rights violations, there are some parallels between the two countries. So in turn, I'll ask each of you to tell us a bit about the current situation in the country for ethnic minorities, to talk in each case about the situation of religious minorities. Is there an escalation in violence and violations against these groups? If so, what are the underlying factors, in your opinions, that are contributing to this, and what is the way forward? Maybe I'll ask Namalka to start on that topic with respect to Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt, and also thank you to the organizers, our respective representatives and staff in Geneva for getting us back to be involved in this discussion. And also all of you, a very good morning. It's sometimes very encouraging to see so many people gathering as the work in Geneva is slowly wrapping up, and especially in the morning to see this interest in Burma and in Sri Lanka continuing. Without taking your time, I think there is a lot of background discussions and documentation with regard to what has happened in Sri Lanka and what is presently happening in Sri Lanka. It's very important to understand the issue of the present in terms of how I would look at it. The issues of increased militarization in Sri Lanka, authoritarianism, the collapse of the rule of law. They are all tied to what I would call the unresolved national question of Sri Lanka. Soon after independence in the post-colonial Sri Lanka, the political leaders, both the Tamil Muslim and the Sinhalese, have had to carve out a Sri Lanka that would provide refuge to all the communities living in Sri Lanka. But unfortunately, the more majoritarian aspect of nationalism in terms of singular nationalism won its day. And if you look at the conflicts that emerged in Sri Lanka, it's based on this unresolved national question, and it's still the challenge that we face even presently. There are two major communities living in Sri Lanka, the Sinhalese and the Tamils. And my personal political analysis is it's two nations, one country. But in terms of the conflict we have seen in Sri Lanka emerged because of the issue of not being able to evolve a nation state that recognized the existence of the other community, that is the Tamils. You in terms of numbers, it's a minority, but in terms of the political analysis from the national struggle of the Tamils, they have called for a state, separate state, federal state, power sharing. There have been 3 or 4 political challenges that we've had to face as democratic activities. So the collapse of democracy deficit, what we are seeing in terms of militarization, what we are seeing now with regard to the constitutional making is so related to this issue one would call minority equal nationalism, but it's not a minority community in that sense of in terms of its analysis. Then we also have the religious minority, the Muslim community. They've also had their own experiences since independence. In 1990, we had this issue of ethnic cleansing that took place in the northern province, because as I would say, the first national struggle was being waged. The Muslim community was asked to leave the northern territory during the conflict. So that's like they became IDPs. So the Muslim community came to the south and they started living in the south. Since then, we've also seen the emergence of an identity politics in Sri Lanka from the Muslim community and the emergence of the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress. So if you look at the past 30 years in Sri Lanka, it has been a political challenge for us to evolve a country that would give equality, that would recognize, not give equality, recognize the existence of the other than the Sinhalese. In building a country that, in my terms, would provide security, power sharing, a status of dignity to all communities, and recognize human rights for all. In the recent past, we saw the escalation of religious extremisms emerging, especially during the Mahinda Rajapaksa regime. And it's very interesting, presently I would say that religion extremism has slowly died down. which also showed how the more Buddhistic Sinhala state tried to use religious fascism, religious extremism to attack the emerging identity political challenges of the Muslim community. Because you have on the one hand the Tamil ethnic issue, which is non-religious, but you also have the issue of the minorities. Soon after, in the war, the Sri Lankan government claimed the LTT was defeated and that thereby they had dealt with the emerging nationalistic aspirations of the Tamil-speaking people in Sri Lanka. Then once that phase was over, we saw the emergence of the Sri Lankan state attacking the other minorities, including the Christians and the Muslims. They were not sporadic violence, like some of the states, and have been in this lobby for a long time in Geneva. Continuously, countries like Cuba, Pakistan, and China used to identify these issues as sporadic. Today, we stand correct by saying they are not sporadic, they were systemic. And the Sri Lankan state nurtured and fueled the minority religious conflict so that they could intensify their militarization and they could intensify the formation of a Sinhala state. Today, with the defeat of Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Bodubala Sena, which was one of the extremist Buddhist forces that emerged during the last 2 years, have become inactive. But their influence is still there. They are underground. They are still there. But their very overt activism has been curtailed, limited, because the state is no more nurturing the VBS. So in terms of the question that you raised, it's Sri Lanka, but also I think if you look at the whole South Asian region, the issue that we have is the unresolved, the challenge that we have to face in building a nation, building a country. How do you deal with your minorities? And it's collapse of that, of a political paradigm which unites, which recognizes diversity, which practices non-discriminatory policies, laws that had brought in the conflicts in our country.
Well, thank you, Namaka, and actually that is encouraging to know that to the extent that some of the religious extremism or the religious extremism was being fed by state acquiescence and support, that as that acquiescence and support falls away, then that the level of violence and so on also falls away. That is encouraging. I'll ask now Omar to address the same topic in keeping with the spirit of the event. To whatever extent you do see commonalities or stark differences, I think it would be very interesting to draw those out too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Also, before I start addressing, I would like to make one correction. I'm sorry about that biography. I'm not so sure you got it from Wikipedia. Somebody remind me about that. I haven't had a chance to go and look at it yet about this arrest. I was not arrested. So just a correction on my personal data part. Thank you so much for organizing this, and also I'm really honored to be on the same panel exchange with my sister-in-law. You talked about this. Sri Lanka is there is this unresolved national question, which is also the similarity to our situation, which is in our case we call for the democratic federalism, the federal union. You talk about 2 countries, 2 nations, 1 country. In our case, is many nations try to be 1 country, but there is a forced unity, that the forced consolidation of the country after the independence from British, always been forced consolidation of the Burman majority. who is the ruling class. So we have the ethnic minorities, but we use the term nationalities because before the British took over, those ethnic people have their own clans and their own kingdoms and their own territory and all. But because of that, the history, when we fought together for the independence from British and also from Japan, the country came as what we see Burma or Myanmar today, and but the agreement to form the federal union, where everybody is the equal stakeholder or the owner of this house called Burma, but that has never been realized, and therefore soon, just 2-3 years after, pretty much 2 years after the independence from British in 1948, we started getting into the civil war. So this goes on. We do have the difference from the Sri Lanka is Burma has many ethnic armies, and these ethnic armies, whether small or large, with the political aspiration to continue to struggle for ethnic equality and self-determination, are perceived by their own ethnic communities as their armies, because these armies protect their land, territory, culture, and heritage. Of course, these are, like there are in the past, there were like on and off negotiations with the central government. There were times there are ceasefire agreement being signed, but these agreements in the past were never transparent. Never disclosed to the public, so nobody had a chance to know what those agreements are. So like after a time passed, they gone back to the fighting again. But along that line, in the past few decades, the Burma army, with a force of 500,000 men, is actually increasing their presence in those ethnic areas. One ceasefire another, the Burma army entrenched their root in the ethnic areas, ethnic states, taking the land, but also taking the natural resources. So along with that, also what we've been seeing, there is a pattern of the Burma army's behavior of this, the human rights violations in the ethnic minorities areas, starting from the extrajudicial killing, torture, all the way to the sexual violence against the ethnic minority women. And of course that has been well documented, and that's been all the past years of the human the UN resolutions on Burma. You can see all of these the track record of the human rights violations. Right now the country, since after the 2010 election, the country opened up to the world. So what is happening with from the ethnic minorities and the central government? There's been the ceasefire and peace negotiations going on, and to some extent there are positive side. There are progress, because first time ever in our country's history, the Burman majority population, general population, started to talk out loud about the equality of the ethnic minorities, which was never been the case in our generation. So the young generation now are actually joining hands together, majority and minority, calling for the equality for the ethnic minority people, such as the Kachin and the Shan and the Karen. And so that side is positive, and the federalism used to be a taboo, used to be also known as the separatism. Propaganda from the successive regimes has now been diffused among the general public, to some extent coming to understand that federalism is not a separatism, but respecting and recognizing the equality of the equal stakeholders of our country. But the problem that we're having is the situation of the ethnic minorities. Are their lives improved in this ongoing reform process? in general, their lives is not improved yet. The peace process is stalled, but also in the last 2-3 years of the initial ceasefire negotiations, there are actually businesses coming into the ethnic areas. So there are like a natural resource extraction, mining businesses, dam construction. So the ethnic communities in the new Burma or new Myanmar during the democratic transition or reform time, they're not really seeing or benefiting from the trickle-down effect of the current reform. So that is where these violence against the ethnic minority women continue to be the case, and like any ethnic minorities where the Burma army want to target the relevant ethnic armies, the civilians are targeted first, being accused as associating or supporting to the ethnic armies. And particularly the Article 17/1 and Lawful Association Act is a huge threat on the ethnic minority civil society organizations or the civil society actors in the country, because they can be charged at any time supporting to the ethnic army. So that's also from the legal perspective how things are. I think probably I would just kind of I think I want to also make a comparison also on the nationalism, something that we didn't see in our country's history before. Before 2010 election, Burma Army General Tan Shui, the previous dictator, who now withdraw from the public appearance, took the state visit to Sri Lanka. Our Sri Lankan friends actually even staged a protest against his visit. But it was quite a raw visit, and also it's quite a it really created a lot of curiosity among us who are following and watching and working for the change in the country. Why he paid the visit before he actually stepped out before the election to Sri Lanka? Then after the election, we started to see the immediate recurrence of the war in Kachin state, and then this nationalism started to spread across the country, led by the Buddhist monk Wirathu, who's been attacking also the Special Rapporteur Yang Hik-lee and as Secretary General of the United Nations. And he was actually released from the prison, and immediately he started to be able to do all of these things, and he's a very good, he's close to the former military intelligence chief of the country, and also one of the largest crony businessmen in the country, and who happened to be also the chairperson of the Buddhist Association in the country. Yeah. So in that nationalism, now you said that somewhat that's different, whereas for us become a major threat to the democratic opening that we see as along with the army continue to control the country, both the economy and politically, but also this rising nationalism is a major threat to us. Now the Buddhists, because especially the country was closed down for a long time, so the traditionally Buddhists will always take the order from the monks. Is it right or wrong? Nobody will dare to question it, and that's where the most scary thing that we're facing at the moment, particularly for the religious minorities. Even in former capital or the business capital Yangon at the moment, you ask, you stop the taxi, you will see the taxi drivers who are from the Hindu, for example, will be trying to make it visible that they are not Muslim, so that they don't get the different treatment. So when you talk about the Muslim community, is very scared. Even in the community, they are scared. Even the taxi drivers, they've been whether they are stopped where the people said no, we don't take your taxi, or that the Muslim passengers who stop the taxi car where the Buddhist men are driving will say that no, we don't take it. So that is the day-to-day life have come to be more intensified in the country. Whereas the Buddhist monks are not only spreading the hate speech, but also inciting the hate speech, but telling publicly, spreading the CDs across the country, telling the Buddhists not to go into the shops, the Muslim people sell the things, the Buddhist women in particular not to marry, have affairs or marry the Muslim men, or that they will be, punished and not. A lot of like this nationalism is such a scary thing at the moment.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Omar, and thank you in particular for engaging in that way, in comparing and the two situations. I'll ask if there's anyone on this topic in the audience who'd like to make a short comment or ask a question, and then, as I say, we'll have perhaps one comment on each topic as we go through, and then some time, hopefully, at the end to return to topics and that. So, is there anyone who would like to say anything on this topic before we move on? Yes. And sorry, please introduce yourself as well before.
Son?
Yeah.
Hi. Good morning. I'm Leslie Marks from the U.S. Mission, and thank you so much for this panel. Really interesting, and I'm honored to get to be here and to hear you. I just had a question on this because I believe it was yesterday. I'm so confused. The days are streaming into one. But I believe it was yesterday was the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on minority issues. And given the conversation that we've had this morning, I wanted to hear your thoughts, not knowing if you were able to attend that, but to have I have a question about how you would see basically balancing free speech and some of the questions about incitement to hate speech. And just to give a very short context, at the end of the Special Rapporteur's comments, she had noted the intervention that the United States gave and said that she understood our First Amendment rights and put it perhaps in a cultural context that might be specific to the United States is the way that it came across to me while she was nuanced in that. I was a little bit concerned about that, the focus on that being perhaps an American value as opposed to a universal value. But as human rights defenders, I wanted to just ask for your opinions on that balance. Thank you.
Thank you, and then you reminded me about many things that I had not shared, especially the link with Viradu, Buddhist monk Viradu. He attended the first convention of the Budubala Sena, and he was invited to Sri Lanka. And then now that you are telling us about what is happening in Burma, it's very interesting because he came and he was cordially hosted by the BBS plus the Sri Lankan government. One thing I would say, very, very briefly, you also mentioned about the laws. We've had the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was very much used against the minorities. And briefly, if I have to answer this question you raised, I would just say that a Tamil is always a terrorist in Sri Lanka, and a Muslim person is a drug peddler. Right? So, in terms of the minorities, that is how the state has used the Prevention of Terrorism Act against the two communities. And the Christian community is looked upon as CIA agents because we link to the worldwide international Christian community. So imagine the sense of insecurity with which the communities have lived. I'm a Christian. I'm always looked upon as an agent of Western church, CIA, whatever. And that also flows to when we come to the UN, is also then gets add on. You are not a human rights defender. You are a CIA agent. In terms of hate speech, and I think that is the challenge we are all facing: hate speech versus freedom of speech. And I think the ICCPR clause 19 or 18, 20, I think, 20. We need to strike that balance. Hate speech, that's a struggle that we are having in Sri Lanka. We've enacted the ICCPR, falling within ICCPR our own laws. but the clause that deals with hate speech is not legally binding. It's not, we can't take action. It says something, but we can't prosecute anybody. I think that's where we will all struggle, but I think we need to have a law that would ban hate speech, or that would deal with hate speech, but at the same time we need to also respect freedom of speech. I mean, I think anybody has the right to criticize, analyze the ideas, but if it borders against inciting hate, that criticism, if it calls on attacking the other in the name of religion or in the name of your faith, I think that is where the fine line comes in. Free for all, yes, but not free to kill and incite violence. And I think as human rights defenders, that is where even our human rights activities get fine-tuned. When it comes to your right to assert yourself, whether you would use arms or whether you would use violence to espouse the cause. And I think that's the struggle that we will live with. No to violence, no to hatred, no to antagonism and inciting, but at the same time being able to say freely what you want to say. And that's right to conscience and freedom. And I think we have the United Nations, we have the conventions, we have the various frameworks to monitor and to define the parameters of rightfully enjoying our rights, and also defining what we enjoy by way of rights, that it is universally defined, it's interdependent, and it is inalienable. So I think we need to move within those universally accepted principles. Unfortunately, what happens in Asia and also in certain countries, when you begin to define the rights from a cultural perspective and from a very nationalist perspective, we tend to get into the fall, to the wrong lines of thinking. When you bring in the dichotomy between the West and the East, or South versus North, then I think that itself brings a challenge to universally accepted principles of human rights. And I think this is what Burmese rulers tend to use, and this is what the Sri Lankan rulers tend to use in terms of dealing with the issue of hate speech or human rights in our countries. And I think that's a big challenge.
You have reminded me also another comparison is now in Burma, the anti-terrorism bill that is already I don't know, it's already introduced on the floor in the parliament or not, but that is already a draft already been prepared. But that also, when the draft came out, the bill came out, we were quite worried. Is also how that bill is going to be, used against the human rights work that we all do. But also the same thing with the hate speech, because we were discussing, also debating among ourselves, should we actually propose to the parliament to actually, come up with the law against the hate speech, but how would that be in the context knowing of who is in the control of the politics in the country? We are wondering how that is going to be in favor of the people for the freedom of expression and speech, or will it fall in favor of the